All right.
Alrighty.
How's it going?
Good.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Nut Up Show podcast, where we sit down and we talk about, I don't know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Mostly about things that we're trying to do to improve our lives and to live the best life possible.
Yeah.
And today, this is actually pretty exciting because we're going to talk about this book that you read, Andrea. It's called Curable, how an unlikely group of radical innovators is trying to transform our healthcare system.
Yeah.
So this is pretty interesting. Before we get into this book, I think maybe it'd be good to say like why we're interested in things like this. And I don't know if you'd say that we're always thinking outside the box, or always thinking that, you know what, just because it's what you hear and what it's mainstream, I guess, doesn't mean that that's the only way forward
To do it. Yeah.
And I guess we really started thinking about that ever since Tristan was diagnosed with autism.
Yeah.
And then we saw Mr. Big Shot Specialist, who's the best guy, whatever. And we're just like, why don't you just give him these basically high dose schizophrenic drugs for your son and he'll never talk again. And that's it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, no, he'll never talk ever, is what he said.
right.
But
Not.
yeah.
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 Well, he was talking before, but then he
lost it.
stuff, so.
No, so yeah, definitely that's where this kind of drive comes from, and just always asking questions and knowing that there's a better way forward. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, I guess that encompasses the whole thing, because I mean, we're really interested in trying to figure out how we can be as healthy as possible.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously your nutrition is part of it. Staying healthy and exercising is part of it. Exercising your mind and keeping your mind sharp is part of it.
Yeah.
But the other part of it, which I guess not a lot of people talk about, which is what we're going to talk about today, is the actual healthcare system itself. I mean, that's a big part of it, because what do you do when you do get sick or when something does happen?
Well,
right?
yeah, and I mean, you are going to get to a point probably where you're going to have to go into the doctor, and maybe you're not comfortable with what they're telling you, or you think that maybe there is a better way forward. And I think being able to advocate for yourself, knowledgeably, and not being afraid to ask questions, or saying like, slow down, I have this question and I need to be answered because this is my life. And I think that's something that was forced upon us, and we were forced to learn how to do that because of Tristan and other issues. So that's where that comes from as well. Yeah.
All right. So that's, I guess, maybe a little bit of a preamble.
Yeah.
So why don't you start off by, because this is going to be kind of a journey for me, because I haven't read this book, but we're going to talk about it too. But because I think you've probably read it a couple times now, just to kind of digest the information.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be an exploration of kind of what this book is all about. So why don't you start by maybe giving a little bit of a summary of what the book is all about, or how do you want to start?
I was going to start maybe with even like how I came upon this book.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's written by Travis Christofferson. I think he's a journalist originally, and then
It says MS here. Is he a master's?
Yep. Master's in science. Yeah. And so I think it was actually his first book, and the first book of his that I read was called Tripping Over the Truth. And it was about the metabolic theory of cancer. And so right now the prevailing theory of cancer it's called the somatic mutation theory. So basically that you get mutations in your DNA that causes your cells to replicate uncontrollably, which is what cancer is. So that's the prevailing theory today. But back in the 1930s, this Dr. Otto Warburg, actually came up with the metabolic theory of cancer, which is that your mitochondria are messed up, and this is what causes your cells to get out of control, not the mutations not only mutations in your DNA. And so this was like not accepted.
And this was back in the 1930s, you're saying?
Yeah. And he even won a Nobel Prize for finding this out, this Warburg theory. And so, but because the prevailing scientific minds didn't want to accept this theory, it wasn't accepted until now. It's starting to become more mainstream.
Just now?
I would say kind of like within maybe like the last 10, 20 years or so, people are starting to really realize that diet has a lot to do with it.
But it's not still, would you say it's not still mainstream, right?
No, I wouldn't. I would say the way we treat cancer right now is not looking at the metabolic side of it.
So can you explain a little bit what you mean by that, the metabolic side of cancer?
So it's basically how our cells use energy. And so how, glucose gets inside of our cells. And then when there's too much glucose, sugar, which is what our bodies use for energy, that can be the cause of cancer. But then how cancer cells themselves use energy is completely different than from a healthy cell. Mm-hmm. So a cancer cell, it doesn't use oxygen to make energy. You could give a cancer cell all the oxygen it needs. Right. It will not ever use it, which is weird because by using oxygen, you make more energy in the cell. If you don't use if you don't use oxygen to make energy, you don't make as much. But the point is cancer cells use so much glucose that even just by using the crappy version of making energy, they make a lot of energy because they use up so much glucose. But that is a hallmark of cancer, is using sugars in that way to make their energy without using oxygen.
So I guess what you're saying here is that when you're trying to figure out how cancer is growing, mm-hmm. you're saying that this metabolic approach is taking a look at how the cancer cells actually divide, mm-hmm. and try to figure out basically how you can starve them almost by not providing them what they need to create energy.
Exactly. And
because the way that they create energy is different from the way a healthy cell.
Yes, exactly. And so that's why fasting and ketogenic diets, those studies are starting to come out to show that they are efficacious in helping control cancer, even using them in concert with standard of care like chemotherapy and radiation, right. Can really help protect your body cells, but then make the cancer cells even more vulnerable to the chemo and the radiation.
Right, so almost like a double dose.
Double approach. Yeah, exactly. double dose. Yeah, so that was his first book, and it was...
and that was his first book, just describing
the
whole process
the whole process, and just and then where we are now and why the somatic theory needs to be re-looked at. So it was, again, kind of that outside of the box thinking. And so this book just came out and I was like, his first book was awesome. I gotta read this one, especially because it's about not just cancer, but the whole healthcare system itself.
It's kind of interesting. This is a little bit off topic, but it reminds me a little bit of, remember that movie A Beautiful Mind with mm-hmm. Russell Crowe, where he came up with this new theory of economics, whatever it was in the 30s or maybe 50s, I don't know, whatever, right? But it didn't start getting adopted until later. He won this Nobel Prize for a whole lot longer after, because his theories took 40 years to percolate through the system and excuse me, and to get people to maybe change their minds that maybe there are better ways of doing things. So it's interesting that for whatever reason, when you look at the medical industry as a whole, no one talks about how slow it is to change to new theories. And is this the best way to treat people as mm-hmm. a whole? I mean, we could talk about specific examples of what just happens to be going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
Is this the best way? And are there other ways? And then if there are other ways, are people just brushing it off, right? This isn't the way that we do things. What are you talking about? We can't do that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how long things take to change.
Yeah.
Because remember, anything in history, 100 years ago, we used to do this for medicine, blah, blah, blah. That's just stupid, ridiculous. But that now it's what do you think people are going to say in 100 years from now? Saying, you used to do this? Oh, you guys are insane, right?
Well, it's interesting that you even say that, because there is actually a quote in the book that I'm reading right now, Metabolical, and I forget who said this quote. It was said I don't know, years and years and years ago, but it was something like science advances one funeral at a time. And basically what that is it won't advance until the person touting those ideas
is long
gone, because there's no room for those new ideas when the status quo has to be maintained, right? Yeah. So that was a really interesting concept to me. So it's the same thing with everything. Yep. Yeah. So it's interesting.
And it's too bad that, anyways, this is getting a little off topic, but there's lots of politics and stuff that come involved too. You have the pure science of what the data and what the observations are telling you.
Yeah.
But then it's a whole other thing to actually implement policy based on those observations, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, so Curable.
So how this book starts actually really kind of surprises me. I think maybe going through it kind of like chapter by chapter is, you okay?
Yeah,
is like a better way to go through it, because he started out, I wasn't expecting how this book started, and it was like, oh, what is this book about? What is this book about? Right. Why is he talking about this? So he starts off by talking about these two of these researchers that people might even be aware of. Their names are Daniel Kahneman and Amos Traversky, and they were both psychologists. And this was like back in like the 60s and 70s. They were interested in why people make decisions that they do. And the reason...
That's an interesting topic.
Yes. And so the reason kind of what he does is he starts talking about how economists at the time, their theory was people... What does it say? It was organized. So it was called the efficient market hypothesis. This is in economics. And they built these theories that basically are organized around a single basic assumption that people are mostly rational when it comes to decision making.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense at all?
That people are rational?
Rational. No. How many irrational decisions have you made in your life?
Yeah, it's true. I think everyone likes to think that.
Yes.
But then looking back, it's like...
No.
Why was I such an idiot?
Yeah. And I mean, we do like even look impulse purchases at the grocery store, right? Like
emotions just fuel you.
Yeah. And so, but all the economic theories were based around this, that the market will bear this out because people are making rational decisions based on the information. Yeah. But it wasn't that way. And even he gets into, what is his name? The really hedge fund guy. I forget his name.
Hedge fund guy.
Berkshire.
Oh, Warren Buffett?
Yes. So even talks about them. Yeah, so even talks about them and like even how they rose to prominence and how they made their money compared to the other everyone else. It shouldn't have been possible based on those economic theories, how they were making their money.
Like Warren Buffett shouldn't have made money?
Yeah, they didn't think he should be making money based on the stocks and stuff that he was buying, but he was doing it in a completely different way than this economic theory that was built about rational decision making.
Right. So you're saying Warren Buffett wasn't rational when he's making his decisions?
No, he was. That's the point, is he was.
Right, because he seemed like the one he's actually studying each business.
Yes.
Like in depth, going through the books, and he was like, I'm looking at everything.
Yeah. And he talks way more about that. We won't get into it because it's not really the point. But these two psychologists were interested in, well, then like how do people make decisions and how does it come about? And the point is what they found is that no, we are not rational when we make decisions, like not at all. But the point is,
and this also doesn't even matter if you're highly educated or no education at all. We're all kind of the same. We're just making rational decisions.
But the point is there's a pattern. There are patterns,
of course,
to the irrationality. And so they were able to define all these like biases and heuristics on how people make decisions, which was really interesting. They go through so many different like examples in there. And even how you pose a question. You could pose the same question two different ways and have completely different answers, which is, it's really, and I mean, as a parent, you kind of know that, right? Because like, do you want to clean your room? Well, obviously they're going to say no. So you're going to clean your room right now.
Yeah. So that's one's a question, one's a statement.
Yeah. So definitely, I found that really interesting. And so then Kahneman actually went on to write this book called Thinking Fast and Slow to explain these heuristics and how we make decisions and everything. And he even, so his partner, Traversky, died by this time before he wrote the book, but he also won a Nobel Prize in 2002 for, it was like in economic sciences, for his work that completely disrupted these economic theories before. So that was really interesting. So he gets into that. And I guess like the point of all of it is,
must lead back somehow to how people make decisions.
Yes, because it becomes like high stakes, right? When you're looking at how you make decisions in things like healthcare and politics. And so that's the point, is why it gets to the basic reasons as to why healthcare is the way it is now. And it's because of these different biases, these different heuristics in how we make our decisions. And so that was the point of looking at that very first, because it gets down, it's not looking just at the symptoms, it's looking at the root problem of healthcare, which as someone who loves thinking about these kind of things, it's not about treating the symptoms of, say, some sort of pathology, some sort of disease like diabetes. We're not just going to treat the symptoms of high blood glucose. No, you need to get down and what is the actual reason why you have blood glucose, like high blood glucose.
Okay. And so this is what he's talking, this is the start of the chapter. So he's saying that people have these biases in their decisions. They're not making rational decisions. And that's why, and that kind of formed the foundation of healthcare. You're saying that healthcare, or he's saying that healthcare itself is based on almost like irrational decisions, or do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And like how we make our decisions, and not just healthcare itself, but even like the basic science behind the healthcare standards of care and procedures and policies and stuff like that.
And you're saying those are irrational.
Well, like not irrational, but like this is why it is how it is today.
Right.
Because based on these different biases and heuristics we're using to...
Which is why, for example, you're saying to treat diabetes now, the common thing is to give insulin, I guess, right?
Well, not at first, but eventually.
Okay.
Yes.
But, and you're saying throughout the whole process, if someone goes to their doctor, and says they have diabetes, then you're saying that they're not actually going to treat the reason why they have diabetes in the first place. They're just going to continually try to treat the symptoms and manage the symptoms.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then the next part of the book talks about how what he calls how healthcare became a culture of inefficiency. And what's really interesting is he says that during like the late 1800s and early 1900s, the prevailing culture was that it was all about a doctor's intuition. And so I think this is where we see how kind of doctors became these, like being put on a pedestal as gods. Right. We have to do everything they say because everything was based on...
they know everything. They're
on their intuition. And that was... And so even, I mean, as a doctor, you take like the Hippocratic Oath before... like as to become a doctor. So Hippocrates obviously kind of a big deal. And even he said a physician's judgment mattered more than any external measurement. So...
That's not right.
No.
Right there.
No.
Right?
No.
Because you're saying...
No.
All the data could point to one thing, but the doctor would be like, well... I feel like this is the right way to go.
Yeah. And so then he talks about something that I think... I've read about now a couple times in the different books I've read, and it's the era of the radical mastectomy. And so this was developed.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not. It was developed by William Halsted, and this was like early 1900s. What it was when women had breast cancer, it's like they would, do a mastectomy just as usual, but then the cancer would come back. And so Halsted's theory was, we need to remove not just the breast, but the lymph nodes.
Because it's coming back. We just have to remove more material.
Yeah. Because the theory is cancer was just like one spot, and then it would spread out from that spot.
That one spot.
Yeah, which is not how cancer works. It does not work that way. But back then, that's what they thought. So they thought, if it's spreading out from the breast, we'll remove the breast. But then it got into the lymph nodes. We'll take all the lymph nodes. It's still there. We'll take out the whole muscle. So women would walk around not being able to use... it would get so radical that women would not be able to use their arms because the whole muscle and the whole chest muscle, everything would... And they would have like caved in chest. Like it was disfiguring and horrifying. And so this was the standard of care back then.
For how long?
A really long time. I want to say, I don't know.
So
like we're talking 40, 50 years would be my guess.
So given that, do you think that, excuse me, I'm sorry. I had this crazy frog in my throat. So given that time period, do you think it was the right decision because they didn't know any better? So that's the only thing that I was thinking about. Is it you know what? They don't know any better, or did they know any better?
No, they didn't, at that time they didn't, and that's a fair thing to say. You do what you think is best because you want to treat your patient 100%.
But I think there's a time though where something like that is the prevailing theory.
Yes.
But then something new comes out, but then that prevailing theory is still practiced for maybe decades after.
Yes. Well, and that's what he's getting to is. Yeah, like they believed it was the best option and the only option, but they weren't comparing it to anything else.
Right.
There was no comparison to other treatments. There was no comparison between patients or different doctors.
That's tough though. It's life and death. It's like, oh, I'm going to try something special on you. We're not sure if it's going to work or not.
So when they actually then went to do the study, once the clinical trial was invented and thought of, they did do the study comparing radical mastectomy to just regular mastectomy on its own, and then regular mastectomy with chemo. And once they did that, there was no difference in outcomes, no difference in recurrence. Right. So then it's like, okay, we don't need to disfigure women anymore because it's not helping. Yeah. It's not, there's no difference. So, but that wasn't able to be done until these scientists came out and developed
some new methodologies.
The new methodologies. Yeah. And so he does get into the point. He talks about a couple different scientists that were brave enough to kind of come forward. And like the one guy, his name was Claude Bernard, and he was a French physiologist. And he said, when we meet a fact which contradicts a prevailing theory, we must accept the fact and abandon the theory, even when the theory is supported by a great name and generally accepted. So that was a big thing to say, especially like William Halsted was like the guy in cancer back in the day. So to say that out loud publicly, that was a big deal back in the day.
Right.
And then there was another guy, a Danish physician, and he reasoned that doctors may have powerful incentives for a treatment to work. So money, fame, and desperation to prove a treatment could help suffering patients when nothing else will. So there's a lot of motivations behind that.
Right.
So, and I think he was the one that came up with the idea of the clinical trial. And the point of the clinical trial was to guide doctors with best practices and best evidence for best practices.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah. And not only that, but then also statistical powers. So the more people you have enrolled in a study, the better you'd be able to see a signal for a particular... A
signal through the noise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
for sure.
Yeah. And I guess the one thing I will say, though, is I do believe that intuition is important, especially if you're a doctor and you've seen so many patients and you've dealt with one specific disease or something. You're going to have an intuition and you're going to have a better idea. So I don't think you can completely discount intuition, but there has to be more to it.
Right.
It has to be informed, I think.
Yeah. And that's the difference too when we're talking about the actual system that's in place and how things kind of generally go about versus what an individual doctor is going to do and how they're going to go about doing their individual practice. Anyways, okay. So that was kind of like a summary of the first chapter of kind of the first part.
The first two.
Of what he was talking about.
Well, we're not even done through chapter.
All right.
Yeah. So.
Well, again, we just want to go through
of course,
the basics of kind of what the book is all about.
Yeah. So then he goes into like where kind of what healthcare and where it is at today, and so he talks about how doctors proceed today, and a lot of it is, he says, is variation in treatment for the same issue. There's variation in treatment this is US, so it's not Canadian, but so there's variation across the US in different hospitals for treatment of the same problem, and then over treatment, and how those two are like, it's awful, obviously.
So can you expand on that? Because I'm not sure exactly what you mean there.
So that's why I had to have all these examples. Yeah. So, nope. Sorry. So he talks about, So he talks about this one hospital where all of the doctors would, if there was any type of cardiovascular issue in the veins, or the arteries, it didn't matter how small it was, they would treat it. So regardless of if it was extreme to just like, oh, you're probably going to be okay, it didn't matter. They would treat it.
Okay.
So that's kind of like I forget what they were calling that, what heuristic they were calling that, but it was just kind of like that culture of it's just that one hospital, but it was like that culture of we're just going to err on the side of caution, right? Okay. And this kind of goes to the fact too, where if you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And so if you're a surgeon, you're always going to want to operate regardless of maybe if you should or shouldn't. So it's that kind of thinking. The other one was, there was these two towns in Texas, and in the one town, they were spending $3,000 more per patient in this one town than in the other one. And there was a big case study on both of these towns. Demographics were exactly the same. The only thing that was different was the incentive structure, and it was a culture of greed, basically, in this one town that was spending $3,000. Outcomes were not better for the people that were spent more money on. It was just all about this culture of greed and money.
So you're saying the hospital itself had established some type of incentive?
No, it was just about them making money. So it was a culture of, they all had flashy cars and they all had big houses. So it was that
like the doctors.
Yes, the doctors. There. Yeah, exactly.
So how did they end up charging more per patient?
More tests, more interventions. You get more money for it. So that's
right. Is that how the medical system works? I guess because
yes,
hospitals or doctors will charge a person's insurance company, and then that pays for whatever the treatments are, or have you.
Yeah, something like that.
And then maybe the doctors themselves get bonuses depending on how many patients or whatever they run.
Yeah, so
they go through.
Yeah, so the guy that looked at both of them, the explanation for McGowan's extreme overtreatment was the development of a culture. But unlike the culture that had developed in this other one, this culture was about money. So
right. So I guess could you maybe summarize that kind of point? Is that, you know what, the healthcare and hospitals, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a business.
Yep.
And they still need to have money, and there's so many players that are involved. As an example, like you can have the pharmaceutical company, right, where doctors are incentivized to dish out as many, prescriptions of a specific drug or whatever, or if you give out this many drugs or this, then you get a bonus, or so there's those types of incentives that aren't necessarily always for the best interest of the actual patient.
Yeah.
So there's things that can conflict with what could be the best course of action for a patient.
And so what he says is our healthcare system puts doctors in a terrible position. The fee-for-service model of payment dangles a financial carrot in front of every test, scan, and procedure and forces upon our doctors a conflict between making money and the patient's best interest.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly
And then he says, the ultimate result, 30% of all healthcare dispensed is unnecessary.
Yeah, that's a huge number. Talking about waste and trying to ease up on the healthcare system. And imagine if you're at any other job, or say you were a construction worker, and you don't get paid for, building the house. You get paid for every nail that you use in the house.
Or you use I'm
going to use 10 more nails every time I'm putting up a 2x4 or whatever, right? So if you're going to go that route, it's going to cause a drastic overuse of things. I mean, not everyone's going to be the same. Some people are going to be like, well, you know what? I don't need to use all those nails, so I'll whatever. Yeah. The other people's like, well, I'm going to use all the nails I can, because why not? I get paid by the nail. So why wouldn't I do that?
And then the other issue comes into with over treatment, right? Because any treatment you have is associated with a risk, regardless of what it is, right? You take a pill, there's risk of side effects, there's risk of a bad outcome.
For sure.
It doesn't matter. And so what's really interesting is that it's great that we have more early screenings for different cancers now. However, this comes with a cost, because even though we've developed and we've caught cancer earlier, it hasn't translated into less cancer deaths.
So that sounds like a really big thing. So let's hang on a second. Yeah. Is that from this book? He's talking about this?
This is from a bunch of different books I've read.
So, okay. So let me see if I get what you're saying. So in the span of, say, I don't know, the past 50 years, or you're saying our technology and our innovation has led to a whole lot more people getting diagnosed about their cancer a lot earlier than they would, like at the early stages of cancer developing.
Yes.
So we've gotten through huge technology breakthroughs into determining if people have cancer or not. But in that same time period, you're saying that the outcome of how many of those patients are going to live or die hasn't also increased at the same level.
No, this has not translated into to increased rates of survival.
So it's literally the same.
Yeah.
So do you know how much this increase is?
No, it's actually the Cancer Code by Dr. Jason Fung talks a lot about early diagnosis and how it's not necessarily a good thing. So
that's interesting. That's very interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that another day because we want to get onto this.
We can definitely delve into that if we talk about the Cancer Code, because he does go into detail, because it's about how your body is interacting with cancer at that time. It may just kind of be at your body and cancer at a stalemate. And so your body's keeping it in check, but it's still there. It doesn't necessarily mean it needs to come out.
So I have a question for you then. Can your body naturally fight off cancer?
It does every single day.
Like it eats the dead cells or whatever?
Every single day.
What's the autophagy? Is that part of it?
Not really. Yes, it is. Macrophages. It's part of the immune system. Your whole body has this immune surveillance system that goes around seeking out these cells that are not behaving how they're supposed to behave. Even mitosis has how your cells divide. You have checkpoints, and if the cell is being crazy at one of these checkpoints, it's like
self-destruct or something happens.
Yeah. So
interesting. Yeah. So therefore, if your body has a natural way of fighting this off, but I mean, whatever, it has a natural way of fighting it off.
Yeah.
And if you detect it early, you could have been fine anyways?
You could have been fine, and you could actually maybe even do harm, because then what happens is sometimes cancer does become resistant to chemotherapy and radiation. And so maybe you have made that resistance come earlier than it maybe should have.
Interesting.
So that's, I mean, that's a whole other thing to delve into.
Yeah, this whole cancer thing. That's a big...
It's really, really interesting though. But because people are so terrified with good reason...
well, it's deadly.
Yeah, you want to treat it as soon as you find it. So it's interesting for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so how's your tea?
Oh, it's so good. This is my favorite tea ever.
What is it?
Dirty chai.
Okay.
So it's like espresso with chai tea with the chai spice. Oh, it's so good. It's perfect for fall.
Well,
anyway.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So we're establishing now the fact that hospitals and doctors kind of have this incentives that maybe possibly go against the actual best interest of the patient.
So I think it's incentives, and I think it's kind of like that bandwagon effect too. Like if all of the cardiologists are doing it this way, then you feel you have to do it that same way as well. Or if that's the culture of your hospital, then you feel you have to do it that way.
Can you imagine being a doctor and like saying, oh no, I think this is the best way to treat something, but then everyone else treats it a different way? You're going to be seen as this outside doctor. You might be seen as a quack by your peers or whatever. There's that whole thing of like, this is a job in their profession, right? They want to be seen as professional because they want to advance their career or whatever.
Yeah, and it's helping people, right? Is getting good outcomes for their patients, right? Yeah. That's a big thing. The other thing is, because, talking about technology, we're at a point where there was a time when you were a doctor where you knew all of the treatments for all of the different things because there wasn't that many. So you were intimately aware with how treatments worked. We're not at that point anymore because there are so many drugs for so many different symptoms and diseases. There's all different types of scans for diagnostics to be done. There's medical devices for different issues. There's so much that all of our technology and treatments available outstrip what we know.
I can't even imagine how many different drugs there are.
Yeah, and so there's nothing kind of sitting down comparing all of these different drugs for say even just treating diabetes, because having worked at a pharmacy, there's so many different medications you go to first before you go to insulin. But how do you know what combos of different medications to use? Like there's
how do the doctors even know?
How do the doctors know? That's the point, right? And so there's nothing comparing different drugs.
And is that one of the things, I don't know if they talk about in this book, but I mean, when you're in medical school, you don't really learn about how all of these different drugs affect the body, right? That's not the idea of what medical school is. Maybe they'll take a course or so, but like how many different drugs are there? Mm-hmm. And like how is a doctor supposed to know how each and every one of the drugs, number one, interacts with each other, and then interacts with someone in someone's body, and depending on what that person's body is like, how that body is going to react to different drugs. Because obviously people react completely differently to the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was playing hockey back at Waterloo, I played on the pharmacy team. I was the goalie for the pharmacy guys. Yeah, yeah. And these are all these students in pharmacy school. So they do 4 years of this. Yeah. And I remember what they would not disrespect doctors, but just be like, doctors should not be prescribing drugs because they don't have a clue as to what these drugs are. Like, we're doing 4 years just learning about all these drugs and what they actually do. Yeah. So they're like, why are doctors prescribing drugs? Or like they get the prescription to be like, this doctor should not be prescribing you this. They should be doing that. So it's...
Well, you know all the stories I came home with when I worked at the pharmacy. Right. They were hair-raising. Even I'm in there and I'm just like, I can't believe that doctor basically almost killed someone. If the pharmacist, obviously that's their job, is to catch it. But it's just like, wow.
Why are you giving this person that drug?
It's shocking. Yeah.
And how often do things like that get missed from the cracks? Like, I'm sure it happens often enough. Or like,
well, that's not even. My favorite thing about this book, the one line, and this was true in the pharmacy, is you can't read the doctor's handwriting.
That's a whole nother thing. So is that like a rite of passage at medical school? Like, listen, you're gonna make your handwriting the worst that there ever is, and no one's gonna be able to read it. But
he says, consider this: 200,000 Americans die every year because of medical error. 7,000 Americans die from sloppy, unintelligible physician handwriting alone.
7,000?
Yeah.
I don't even want to get into of what simple things that we could instill to alleviate that, right? Instead of like put it down on a computer.
Well, no. This is the thing. Like, so there's, for the most, I would say it was probably about half and half that the doctors would fax in just on the computer. And that's just fine. Even then, though, there was still typos, and we're still like, this doesn't make sense what you're prescribing here. So it was about half and half. And then you get the ones, if they come in from the emergency department, then that is handwritten because there's just no time to put it in the computer. So definitely
make the time. Like, figure out a solution.
I agree with you.
To be able to convey the information of what drug you're prescribing a patient that is life or death to the pharmacist so they can prescribe it properly.
Yeah.
So that's 200,000 people die
for medical error.
And that could be a whole range of different things.
And 7,000 just from bad handwriting.
So out of that, 200,000, 7,000 is just from bad handwriting. Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about fatalities and things that we can do. The pandemic that we're in right now and how many people are dying. Like 200,000 a year. That's like a pandemic.
I know. Yeah.
Every year. There's no outcry. There's no outrage.
I know.
Should there be? I don't know.
I think so. I think those are like easy fixes. Yeah.
Right.
So then
but it's not an easy fix. And that's kind of one of the point is that something that, like you said, we don't make decisions that are logical. Like, is it not logical to fix this problem?
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, maybe we can't come up with the best treatment for diabetes right now, but you know what we can do? We can stop 7,000 people a year from dying because the pharmacist can't read my prescription and give them the wrong drug or who knows whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do that. That seems pretty logical to me.
Yeah.
But decisions aren't based on logic, right?
No.
So it's that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So he tells the problem. This is the first part. He's telling the problem.
This is the problem.
So then he gets into the solutions, which is obviously, it's always my favorite part. It's one thing.
Like watching the nature show. Even those ones get tiring. It was like, oh, the glaciers are melting, blah, blah, blah. Well, you feel like, okay, the world's going to, here's the
solution. Yeah. Well, and that's always my thing, right? It's okay to bitch and moan and complain about something, but have a solution, right? And so he has many solutions, which is my favorite part. And so the best thing is he talks about these really cheap, underutilized solutions that come in. And so the biggest one is what he calls financial orphans, which are drugs that are off patent that can be used for off-label or different uses that they were not intended for in the first place.
All right.
So I don't know if we should give a little bit of a primer on how the pharmaceutical firm,
maybe a little bit.
Just a quick one. So when drug companies develop a drug, they put billions of dollars into it and a lot of time.
Maybe let's use an example of Viagra. That's an example.
Yeah.
They put tons of money into developing it. Yeah.
And then as a pharmaceutical company like Pfizer or whatever, you have a patent on, and you have many patents on one drug. You can have many different patents on the formulation, the time release,
the delivery system,
system, all these things. You put all these patents around it to protect it. And so the longer you have a patent on it, the longer you can only have that only Viagra itself is on the market. Right. Nothing else is on the market.
So this patent basically protects you. So I'm saying I'm the only person that could make this drug and give it to people. And these patents usually last for
10 to 20 years.
Which is a pretty long time.
It's a long time. And so the point of that is there has to be a way to recoup your investment, right?
Because you're spending a lot of money doing this research and so R&D.
That's a way to recoup your investment, and then obviously you're selling it at a high price. So then once
you're the only one in the game.
Yeah, that's right. So then
some people call that a monopoly.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. So then once the generic companies come in, like the Canadian one is Apotex, they come in and they
Sorry, who's Canadian company?
Apotex, it's a generic drug company in Canada.
Okay, so they're basically like a Johnson & Johnson. But
no, Johnson & Johnson is brand.
Right. Okay. So all they do then is they reproduce drugs that are off patent.
Yes.
Once they expire. Okay.
And so they would reverse engineer it. Basically, is what happens.
They probably reverse engineer it from the start, so that by the time the patent is ready 100%. To go,
and they'll
it's like
even before then they'll go to court and they will challenge the patent actually.
Right.
So because it's a big business. So anyway,
business, of course.
So once the generics come, then that's when the price of it drops.
Right. So your Viagra, when it first released in the 90s or whenever it was, $200 a pill. Mm-hmm. I don't know, whatever. It's $200 prescription. And then 20 years later, it comes off patent. That day, it's like, now there's 20 other different companies producing it, same thing. Yeah. So now that $200 goes down to 30 or whatever the hell.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Because there's so much more competition.
Probably the best example is Lipitor, because Lipitor for cholesterol is the blockbuster bestseller drug of all time. Oh, really? Yes. Yeah. So that would be the best example of it.
How much is it sold?
I don't know, billions and billions, like so much money. But then to look at these generic drugs and see, well, what else they can do? Because here's the thing with your body is that things don't work in a silo. You take something, it's not just affecting one pathway, which is why there's side effects to drugs, because it's going to affect a bunch of things. He gives a really good analogy. He says it's like you throw one ball bearing into like some sort of machine with like gears or whatever. It's not just going to affect that one gear it gets into. It's going to affect things upstream and downstream.
Cause a chain reaction.
Yeah. And so that's what happens with medications. And so you really don't know everything else or what other therapeutic things a drug can be used for until it's been used for many years.
Well, so in that thing you're saying, I mean, a side effect doesn't necessarily mean it has to be bad. You're saying it could have unintended outcomes.
Exactly.
And one famous example that I think of, again, going with this whole Viagra thing, is that I think if at first it was developed to be some type of heart condition to help blood flow, to increase heart, then of course it increases blood flow to something else, right? So
and they were like, oh, this is going to be a moneymaker.
So I think this could sell.
Forget the blood vessel.
Yeah, forget about it, right? So that's kind of how that
that's the best
came to be, right? So,
but they knew that before it went off patent, right? So that's why.
Oh, like the drug.
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, of course, of course.
But the point is now with these drugs, the unintended good consequences are not found out until the drug has been used in millions and millions of people for decades.
But it doesn't even have to be a drug that's off patent. It could even just be the drug itself that has been used for 20, 30 years.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. Yep. So there's a lot of these examples. So statins, like Lipitor is a statin. It lowers your cholesterol. That one,
that was initially designed to be a cholesterol drug, though.
Yeah. But what's really interesting is that they used it, or they found these like really cool side effects from the drug, and actually. Anyways, I can't find it, but it was really interesting because people were taking it, and it was actually it reduced like their chance of cancer and stuff. Right. And there's all these like amazing unintended consequences for it. Statins, metformin is another one. Metformin is something that's used for diabetes. It doesn't affect insulin levels. I forget exactly what it does in your body.
Right.
But people are actually using it in, like, you'll hear people talk, like biohackers talk about it, because it is being seen as like a longevity drug.
Right.
Rapamycin is another one. It's used for, what is it used for? It's used for to help stop organ rejection in organ transplants. But again, it's also being seen as used as like a longevity drug because it inhibits this one pathway in your body.
Unintended consequence.
Yeah.
So basically what you're saying is, let's see if we can simplify this, is that drugs come off patent, or even, it doesn't even matter if it's a drug. You just say a drug is being used for a long time and it's been administered millions, maybe even billions of times to, to different people. So what you do is you take all of these people that have taken this drug, and then you just kind of analyze the data. It's like, oh, look at this. All of these people that are taking this drug, we're noticing a pattern that there's a 20% decrease in the amount of cases of cancer or whatever. And
that are on these
drugs. So then you try to figure out if there's any kind of actual causation to the correlation that you're finding, right? And then you can say, oh, and then just doing those types of studies, you can kind of find these hidden benefits that you never even really knew. Because at the end of the day, when you throw in that drug in your system, nobody really knows how it's going to react. I mean, they could develop the pathways to hit that certain target or whatever, but then what happens after?
Yeah. Oh, no, here's the thing. So when statins were added to the standard of treatment for patients with liver cancer, it increased the median survival rate by 100%.
That's a pretty big increase.
It's a pretty big increase, yeah. So then another kind of like less technical stuff is it's unreal. So there's C. difficile with infections, and you often get them in hospitals after surgery, and they're like so antibiotic resistant, and your chances of survival,
it's very low.
Very low. And so a really cheap and easy way to get rid of this is a fecal transplant, which is gross. But a paper found in 2011, out of 300 patients that did a fecal transplant, 92% of them were cured. That's pretty high.
And considering that, what was the percentage that you would die if you got this illness?
It's pretty bad. And it goes...
Like 90% of the people would die because...
The first round of antibiotics works for approximately 75% of people.
So 25% death rate.
Yeah, but then... So from the 75% with the first round to 40% to the second round to 20% to the third, and so on. So your chances of, once you've had one round of antibiotics that doesn't work, the next one it's not. Their chances are lower and lower.
Well, yeah. But they're saying 25% die or survive. No.
25% die.
25% die. Yeah. And then the ones that survived, they're not all for sure cured then.
No.
So then some more die from there. Yeah.
So there's no other treatment that they use in the hospitals.
So you're saying, just back up a bit. You're saying this is some kind of bacterial infection that people get from what?
After surgery in a hospital.
So it's just a bacterial infection that is like one of these superbugs that people talk about.
Yes.
This antibacterial resistant bacteria.
Yes.
So now, in order to treat it, you're saying basically you do a fecal transplant. So basically, that's just transplanting someone else's shit into you?
Yes.
Like into you how?
Enema.
Into an enema. So they just shove someone else's shit up your ass.
Well,
let's just be clear.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And why is that effective? And why would that be effective?
Because, so we've heard of probiotics, and it's just like, maybe 2 to 5 different strains that you're getting.
Yogurt, it has 100 million doses of probiotic.
So,
which is just another word for bacteria.
Yeah. So think about a rainforest and think about that ecosystem within a rainforest. So it's like the difference between that rainforest and like our little forest over here that has like ducks and some fish and that. So that's the probiotic that you're taking. So the rainforest is like, that's the fecal transplant, is you're transplanting a whole freaking diverse ecosystem into your body that's going to outcompete that C. diff and maybe even attack the C. diff to get rid of it. So that's
so you're just basically fighting bacteria with other bacteria. Yeah. Basically, because it outcompetes everything. Yes. If you look in nature, and I know a little bit about this because I kind of studied ecology, but things kind of keep themselves in balance where they're always, nothing is going to grow completely out of control because everyone is competing for a limited amount of resources, right? unless something comes along that has a huge advantage, which has like no predators or whatever. So something like this bacteria will come along because that person's maybe their immune system or their own rainforest has been depleted so much that they only have a few different things, so that this new kid comes on block and can just ravage everything, right?
Well, yeah.
So then you inject somebody else's rainforest or their own feces that has all these different bacteria in there to help repopulate your body. Well,
it's not just bacteria. Like it's like we have tons of virus in us, parasites that are like work with us that aren't actually parasitic, but all that stuff. Because the other thing too is you have to think, if you're in the hospital with something, with surgery, you're already on antibiotics, which has cleared out your...
That's true, because antibiotics, they don't just target one specific strain of
kills everything.
Bacteria. It kills everything. Which is why it's like you really want to careful with taking antibiotics.
Yes.
And, anyways, that's a whole other conversation.
Thing. But so that was...
So this fecal transplant though, like who are you getting it transplanted from? Do you find like a healthy person, or is this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know too much about it. He gave like a really good case study of this one woman. She was just desperate. She was going to die. And so she freaking YouTube. She looked it up on YouTube, how to do an at-home fecal transplant. And she used her husband's. I know, and they did it.
She lost his life.
She was gonna die. Like she was going to die, and she's fine.
Because she had like a bacterial infection.
She had C. diff, and it was
for how long?
It was like long, and it was like antibiotic after antibiotic wasn't working. They were at the point there was nothing left to do. There's nothing. So
the doctors just sent her home.
They sent her home.
You're just gonna die.
Yep.
And then she just.
They did it.
So this is why people think
I know
that, because that is it crazy? Well, she's alive, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, why aren't these? Yeah, like, but then it's like, should it be? But it makes, if you think about it logically, like, listen, your whole immune system and your whole microbiome, which a lot of people don't know about, is just completely decimated, right? It's like, think of a forest that just has nothing left.
Yeah. And the forest fire has gone through there.
Well, maybe that's not a good analogy, because that's actually really good for you. But you know, but just like, it's one thing. There's something comes in that has no natural predators or whatever. It could just roam free, like like an invasive species. It just comes in and decimates everything.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But then it's logical to like, well, let's replenish your forest. Let's give you all kinds of more diversity or whatever to give a natural fight to these things. Yes. Because
so again, you're talking about logic, and you're talking about how we make decisions, and you're talking about incentives. That was free for her, basically, right? So
hey, listen, I got feces. You want some?
Throw it at each other.
Throw it. And she just gave herself an enema, or did she take it another way?
No, it was enema.
Weren't you saying something that there's people that just eat? Just like ingested orally?
Yeah, there was this. Yeah, that's a whole other really cool story. I forget where I read that. It was really cool, though. This was like back World War II. Yeah, because
people
it was
were dying from
dysentery. The German soldiers were dying of dysentery, and they noticed that the local people there, if they felt sick, they would start to eat camel poo, and they would be cured. It would be fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
because of the bacteria.
Because of the bacteria. Yeah.
I don't know.
So
crazy.
That's gross, but an even simpler one is there was this one example, and then I want to get into something a bit more cool. So this other example is there's this famous surgeon. He's wrote a bunch of books. His name's Atwal Gawand, and he worked with the WHO, the World Health Organization, to come up with a 19-item checklist to do before surgery. And they found that when this checklist was implemented, and it only took 2 minutes to fill out, it wasn't onerous, like it was a simple checklist. And it's when implemented in hospitals, the complication rates fell 35% and death rates fell 47%.
Yeah.
But it's not implemented in hospitals across the board.
No. Checklist before surgery?
Yeah, no.
Even today?
Even today.
Really?
Yeah.
That is crazy because you know, like when astronauts or when they do the shuttle, there's checklists, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And even though it's seemingly so stupid, you just do your checklist. And they do this for planes. It's like pre-flight checklist.
Yes.
I think that was developed World War I, World War II. I don't know. It's like so many pilots, they're just dying on takeoff because they forget some stupid thing. So it's like, go through the damn checklist. And it's like, you implement it, it's like 90% reduction in people dying or whatever.
Yeah.
So they have this for important things, maybe because it's important, because there's like launching this rocket. We have like $250 million invested in it. We can't just have it explode, right? So you go through your checklist. They don't implement this in hospitals at all.
Not
like,
all
where
the
did
time.
this? Where did he? You just did the study somewhere.
Yeah, in a couple hospitals, but I guess getting people to adopt it is really difficult.
Yeah, even though it's something that's simple. You have to make it. Like, listen, you want to save people's lives. This is a whole.
Yeah.
All right. So these are two things that he says are simple things that people can do.
Like, that's free. A checklist is free.
You do a checklist. Right? And you look at data to see what's already out there that we've developed that could potentially be of benefit instead of trying to come up with something new. All right.
So, and this is the next thing that comes in, which I think you're going to really like because it's to do with like data specifically. So there was this one guy who was a doctor, but he also loved math, and he was this huge statistician. His name's Brent James. And so he worked for Intermountain Healthcare, and so it's a network of hospitals and clinics in the States. And so what was really cool is he took obviously his medical background and his love of math and statistics, and he was looking at all this, they're called EMR, so electronic medical record systems. Okay. So he would take all that data and then use that data to go back and look at different outcomes and try and tease out best practices from all of the doctors and then implement those best practices. And then if there wasn't a best practice that he could find, then it was testing them within the hospital network to see what the best practices were. Okay. And then even talking to doctors to come up, like, obviously not just using data, but looking at their intuition as well and making it a consensus decision on what they did. So a couple examples are giving antibiotics for surgery. So it was all over the place, completely inconsistent. So again, that inconsistency that we talked about, like, in terms of treatment.
Doctors maybe they would give an antibiotic, maybe they wouldn't. They'd give a different kind.
It was about timing. It was about, do you give the antibiotic before surgery? How much before surgery? Do you wait till after surgery? How much after surgery? And it was wildly inconsistent. So he goes back and he looks in the data and he can't really see a signal. So they test it. They take a look at all the different surgeries when the antibiotic is being given, and then they find the best time.
Oh, you know what? Actually, if you give it at 2 hours before surgery,
which is what they found.
Was it? That gives the best recovery rate or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So he analyzed the data. It was almost 3,000 patients. There was a massive reduction in infections in the group given antibiotics 2 hours before the first incision. So once they found that, then it's like getting the.
Did you stop hitting your microphone?
Sorry. Then getting the doctors to implement it, and then. Obviously you're going to have those stick in the muds that don't want to change their ways. So then this is when he kind of used this whole, our biases and that bandwagon effect, kind of like to work
you get
for
everyone
us,
to buy into it.
To get everybody onto it, right? You would have, paper bag lunch seminars about these different things and get doctors talking about it and all those things. So it was interesting using all of the data that you're collecting to find better ways. And he did this for like a bunch of different things, even like when to induce for a pregnancy, like the best time to induce. Yeah. And obviously maternal health and infant health increased and all these things. So that was really, really fascinating to me.
Yeah. So look at the data and actually let the data speak and not rely on arbitrary decisions by the individual doctor.
Exactly. So that was a really interesting way to use all this crazy data that we've accumulated now. So,
But obviously, I would imagine that's not really implemented quite often or as much as it should be in hospitals around the world, I would imagine.
Yeah. I don't think so. But and then so he gives like all these awesome examples of like how we can improve healthcare that way. And then he goes into talking about this really awesome new, and this sounds like it's not going to be related, but we'll come back around. It will be. He talks about social genomics. And so how our social interactions affect our genes.
Okay.
And how they affect the expression of our genes. And I remember when I read this, I was really excited and I was like telling you all about it.
So this is the thing too, we can say that, I mean, everyone is born with a specific set of genes, all right? Mm-hmm. We have different genes, but it's not something where you're born and then they're expressed as they're going to be for the rest of your life. And that's to say that your genes can be turned on or off throughout your life, depending on what happens to you.
Yep.
And those expressions of those genes, what do they do when they're expressed? They just have different, like when a gene is expressed in your body, what does that do for you?
So it makes a protein.
Makes a protein.
And
Okay.
that protein could be anything. Let's dumb it down, because
that's what I'm trying to do here.
It's really so.
I'm already getting lost.
Yeah. So I have a really good example. So you can think about all your DNA in your body. Think about it as a piano. Everybody has the same notes. It's all the same because we're all human. Okay. Then you can think of epigenetics as the piano player, and that the epigenetics is what turns your genes on and off, or turns the volume up or down on the gene. The gene can still be on and making stuff, but maybe not so much, or maybe like a lot of it.
So that's different from someone who's actually playing the piano? You're going to come to that analogy?
Yeah. So that is the person that's playing the piano. So you can have a different type of music being played. You can have jazz. You can have Elton John. You can have whatever you want playing. It can be soft. It can be loud.
Sure.
That is the point that's what the epigenetics is, and that's how your genes are being expressed. They're being expressed as jazz. It's being expressed as really crazy loud AC/DC, like whatever, right? It's being classical music. That's the epigenetics, how your genes are expressed.
And why is that important to know how your genes are expressed?
Because
what's the outcome of you as a human?
Because how your genes are expressed is up to you. So if you eat shitty food, your genes are going to be turned on or off because of that food. So basically it's how you interact with the environment. If you, like a lot of us, have been under lockdown and are feeling very lonely, that is going to affect not just your mental health, but your physical health as well.
Right.
So that's the point.
Because different genes are being expressed or not expressed or suppressed?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Based on your interaction with the environment. That's where there's that saying, nature loads the gun. Sorry. Genes load the gun. DNA loads the gun, and then nature pulls the trigger. So you're born with your genes, but really 80% of the expression is up to you and what you do with those genes that you have.
Right.
So.
Okay. And how does this turn?
So just one more example. So for example, there is the breast cancer gene, the BRCA 1 or 2. You could have that gene, you could have that bad mutation and be more susceptible to breast cancer, but you can do things to mitigate it so that you don't get breast cancer.
Right, like playing a piano in a certain key turns on that gene, right? It's like, oh, I love that tune, let's go party, kind of thing. Whereas suppose you play this other one, it's like, oh, this is the worst song ever, I'm just going to stay here and not do anything. And that could just mean if you constantly feed your body sugar, as an example, that's what that thing needs. It needs a bunch of sugar, and it's going to get at it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's going to start growing. And so like, this is really good. It's like you're providing me with the environment that I need to flourish.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And so this whole new field of social genomics is looking at how, because we're social creatures, is how our social interactions affect how our genes are expressed. And so this thing was the most fascinating thing to me. Researchers analyzed all these different genes, and they showed that, let me get in here. So the genes involved in responses to viral infections, were downregulated. So that means if you are lonely, obviously that's going to be subjective, right? So if you are feeling lonely, your genes that help with your viral response are going to be downregulated, and you're not going to be able to fight off a virus as well as you could if you don't feel that way.
That's very interesting. And let's be honest, even before this pandemic, a lot of people feeling lonely, depending on the way that our technology and social media and all that stuff, that's a whole nother topic that we can talk about. But
so the authors of the study went on, these results provided a molecular framework for understanding why socially isolated individuals show heightened vulnerability to inflammation-driven cardiovascular diseases and impaired responses to viral infections and vaccines.
Yeah. And this was written, when was this book written?
I think it was before.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. let's see, 2019.
Oh, so it was written. So it was published, in 2019. So that means it was written before then. So this was even before stuff came out.
Yeah.
So what I'm reading, So maybe let's talk about this and just kind of summarize it in what's going on today, I guess.
Okay, because I was going to get...
Do you want to bring something back full circle? Go ahead.
Yeah. So the point of this is knowing because we know how important social stuff is for us. By using things like looking into the data of these different data management systems for patients, looking at these different uses for drugs and cheaper, easier treatments, then hopefully that leaves doctors with a better idea of what to use for their patients and almost puts it on not quite on autopilot, but lets them feel maybe a bit, interact with their patients more. Because if you have that more social connectedness with your doctor, everyone knows if you go to a doctor and you actually feel heard because they're taking the time and it's not just a conveyor belt of patient after you. If they have the time to speak with you, then that's when they can use their intuition and their experience to say, I don't think that treatment would
actually
work
get to know the
for
person, right?
Exactly.
And know what kind of music they like to play.
So would that affect, even just that interaction, would that affect your treatment? I would assume it would, right? And so that's where it comes back to not discounting a doctor's intuition or experience, but using it in conjunction with these new methods of treatment. And then, having that interaction and that compassion and empathy with your patient, I think it's everything.
Yeah, and to not have doctors look down on you, because there's some doctors that think they just know everything, and they look at you as if you can't even ask me a question. How dare you even ask me a question?
Or you have doctors that
I'm your doctor. I tell you what's best for you.
Yeah, or you have doctors that just straight out blame you, which doesn't help anybody. I mean, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. So
that's why I think he has that point in about the social aspect, because we all know it's really important.
Well, I don't think we do. To be honest, I don't think we do.
Yeah, you're right.
Let's just, so this is great. Thanks for going over this book. I think this is fantastic. I think anybody here who's watching or listening, definitely pick up this book. We've been talking about this for over an hour now, so maybe you've got enough of it, but
there's so many case studies in it and so many different stories. Right. It's a lot more fulsome, obviously, than what we talked about. It could just help
you just change your perspective on what is going on in the healthcare system, and just to maybe push you a little bit to start to take your own health into your own hands and realize that, you know what? Of course, obviously, doctors are helpful and they do a lot of good, but they don't know you as well as you know yourself, right? So if you get to understand...
Or your kid.
Or your... Yeah, exactly. Or your kid. So, I think it's a fantastic read, and I think a lot of people would be good to get the knowledge that's in this book. So, talking about what we're doing now. So, we're here in Canada. So, we've been in lockdown I guess we're not really in lockdown anymore, but I don't think there's any restrictions. So, but we were in a lockdown for a long time.
Yeah.
Where it was basically you couldn't even go anywhere, and it was just basically stay at home. And even in some parts of the country, there was even a curfew where you had to just literally be indoors.
Yeah.
So we talk about these decisions that are being made by, doctors or whatever. They make this decision of in order to stay safe and to stay healthy, everyone just has to stay indoors. Mm-hmm. Is this taking into account all the data that's available, that's out there? If social interactions and being around people is so critical, and how we're finding now in new research and new studies that, again, like you just said, if feeling lonely and isolated increases your susceptibility to virus, increases your susceptibility to being sick, mental illness, weight gain, all these negative things that are associated with being lonely. Is this the best course of action for us to take as individuals? And I think that's something that people I think we need to actually we just need to have these conversations.
Well, and I think, I don't want to come out seeing we're against lockdowns by any means, but I think
everyone can come up with their own decisions as what they think.
But I think the point is about being able to ask the question and not being because there's so much nuance to it. To being able, as a scientist, which is what you do, is you're constantly searching for the right answer, the truth. And so being able to ask questions, I think, is at the very basis of being scientific minded. So being able to ask questions without fear is really important. And then being able to turn the ship around. Well, you know what? We thought this was the best option, but looking at this data, maybe it's not.
Maybe
and we need to figure something else out because we're hurting more people.
Yeah, you say like, oh, well, suicides are up, depression is up,
domestic violence
is up, obesity is up, alcoholism is up, all these negative things.
Exactly. Is the cure worse than the disease?
Right. So it's those types of questions that I think that we, as a society, at least right now, we're just not asking.
No.
And there's no conversations that are being had.
No.
I don't hear any debates going on with our politicians about any of these policies that are being put in place. It's just, this is the way it is.
But then it goes back to everything he's saying about biases and our decision heuristics and, let's face it, incentives, which drives everything, right? So what is the incentive for this? I think there's always the question you need to be asking.
Yeah. And going well, speaking on that one, look at the incentive. I mean, everyone stay at home and just wait for a drug company to develop a vaccine and then everyone gets it.
Yeah.
Is there an incentive there? Is somebody going to be making a shitload of money here?
Probably.
Probably somebody is making a shit ton of money on this.
Which, again, to caveat it, it's not that we're saying no vaccine.
Ask
we're
questions.
Not saying that at all. We're just saying ask the question.
Ask questions.
Simply ask the question.
Is it the best course of action, right? And you talk about one of this ideas of, what's out there right now? Is there anything that's out there right now that could potentially be a benefit to people? And I don't know if you've heard of this or not, but there's a lot of talk now that's been happening on this drug that's been around for 40 years, and it's called ivermectin. And it is a drug that has antiviral and antiparasitic properties that has been used.
And antibacterial.
Yeah, has been used worldwide for decades to solve people's problems with, what's the actual illness?
River blindness.
River blindness, which is a bacterial infection, right?
It's a parasite.
It's a parasite. Oh yeah, it's a parasitic infection. So now some of the early data is suggesting that this could actually have some really good positive effects in being able to help counteract against COVID. So
it's not even just ivermectin. There's other things as well. There's I can never say this one drug word right. It's like fluoxetine or something.
Fluoxetine. It sounds like something from Back to the Future.
Fluvoxamine. I think that's it. Fluvoxamine. And I'm pretty sure it's an antidepressant. And so it's shown huge promise.
Right.
Same with even a new technology like monoclonal antibodies. That's a huge new technology that has shown a lot of promise.
Right.
So it's about.
So the idea here is not to say things are right or wrong. It's like, let's look at everything from a holistic approach. Are there things that we can do here that we already have that could work for us?
And in conjunction with social, social distancing, with vaccines, I think the solution to any problem is going to be multi-pronged. It's going to be a multi-pronged approach.
But that's not what it's now. It's definitely a sledgehammer to just.
Yeah. And I think a really good example that is our example with our treatment with Tristan is we were not impressed or satisfied with just get on the 6-year wait list for behavioral therapy and here's this drug you can give him. We weren't satisfied with that, and we knew it couldn't just be one or two things. It had to be a bunch of things.
Yep.
So we did 3 different types of therapy with him. We changed his diet, added some supplements in because he wouldn't eat anything.
Right.
It had to be.
Well, he wouldn't eat anything that wasn't healthy, right? He ate other stuff that was unhealthy for sure,
and
right?
he would only eat 3 things.
And it's just stuff that's just packed with sugar or processed junk, right?
So we knew, it's something like that had to be a multi-pronged approach. It couldn't just be one thing and that's it, because he's not one thing. We're not one thing.
Right. So and that's where, for us taking this lessons from Curable, we kind of, even before this book was written, that's the stuff that we were doing back, 12 years ago with Tristan, and look how far he's gotten now. But if we would have listened to what the doctors were saying at the time, who knows where he would be.
No, I don't
know. If we just did that, he, I guess he'd not be talking, or he'd just be high all the time on all these drugs, and that would have altered his brain chemistry. Yeah. So who knows what, he would be a completely different person. Yeah. And in that way, I remember it was just managing symptoms. It's like, tantrums or behavioral issues. Yeah. Well, let's just drug the shit out of them. So then he'll just sit in the corner drooling, and not be a shell of what he could be. So then I take a look at that and what we did there. And even then you can say, people look at us, oh, you're crazy, or you're doing whatever. But now it's like, oh, tell me about what you've done. Tell me about what worked, because that sounds like a really good approach. Mm-hmm. So then I take that and I compare it to what's happening now. And it's like, oh, here's the one way to beat this thing. Yes. And I'm like, is it the one way? Well, I want to try this. I want to try that, because let's see what's the best here for everyone or other people. Yeah. And what's it going to be like in 10 years? It's like, we should have done this. We should have done that. We should have done it all together. So, and it's just, but the difference is that now, like you're saying, it's like if you ask questions, mm-hmm. it's like you're almost like not even allowed to ask questions. Yeah. Because asking a question means, just if you ask a question now, you're automatically labeled as maybe you're an anti-vaxxer. Are you asking a question about it? Well, then that must be it. It's like, really? So, anyways, I don't want to get into that because that's a whole other issue. But it's even let's bring it back to just how to live your best life and how to nut up, right? And I think because nutting up is not just about eating a certain way or making sure you get a workout in. It's about eating to fuel your body so that your body can do some sort of activity that you love. It's about enriching your relationship with your spouse and your kids and your family and friends. All of those things are going to make your life better. It's how to be financially able to do the things that you love, to have the experiences to make your best life. And so it's not just a one prescriptive thing. Everyone's different, and you need all of those things in your life to make it your best life possible. And to be honest, going with what things are taught now to people, it's you're not going to get there. I don't think anyways, because as a quick example, it's like the world of finances. They don't even teach kids about investing and how to save and all the different options that are out there. Yeah. So if you follow there's no equivalent, there's no financial hospital you can go to, but you know what I mean? But if you listen to what you're taught in school, you're not going to end up getting rich. I'm not saying I'm going to end up getting rich, but at least I'm trying different things that are not taught, right? Because I think that's what's going to be the best for me moving forward.
But not only that, I mean, you don't even know. I never even learned about credit. I didn't even know what that was, right? And so you don't even learn about that, how important
that is huge. And I think you talk about being logical and making logical decisions. Even when we first bought our car, I walked into the bank and they're just like, oh, well, I want to buy a car. We can give you $20,000. I'm like, you can? Yeah. And then I was like, okay. Cool. I had no idea what my credit score was there. I kind of knew that there was a thing. I had never checked it ever in my life. Yeah. I just walked in there. Oh, I get 20 grand. Didn't even think about it. Just took it. Right. Any thoughts of paying it back? No idea. Yeah. Right. So yeah, there's lots that you can learn and just be open to learning and questioning things that are brought to you, and question your own beliefs and what you think is right, and be ready to adapt and change and to just nut up and do whatever you have to do to get your shit done that's good for you. Yep. And to hell with what anybody else says.
Preach.
To a certain point, right? Again, you want to be open to what people are saying. Mm-hmm. But if you're people are saying no, you have to do this. It's like, well, you know what, the hell with you, because you're wrong in this case, well, you need to eat 3 square meals a day. It's like, do you though? I'll listen to you and be like, well, no, you're wrong. So this is what works for me. Yeah. So,
cool.
Anyways, get into all these things.
Anyways, it's a great book. I totally recommend it. Probably one of my favorite books I read this year.
Absolutely. Fantastic book.
And it's a small one. It's a small one.
It is small. How many pages? It's not even 200 pages.
I know, but there's so much great information in it. Yeah. He's a good writer. He's a really good writer.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. All right.
Anything else you want to say?
I'm good.
That's good. All right.
Have a good week, everybody.
Have a great week.
Yeah.
Nut up.
Get
shit done.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
See you.
See you next week.